Republican candidate for governor Jeff Diehl is our guest this morning. Let's go on the record. He is joining the fray whether the incumbent Charlie Baker is in or out. Can his more conservative brand of Republican politics win over the voters he'll need? The candidate is here to make his case. Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
And welcome to OTR This Morning. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. It's great to have you with us. And joining us in Studio C this morning is Jeff Diehl, a Republican candidate for governor in 2022. He's a former state rep from the 7th Plymouth District. He ran unsuccessfully for the U.S. Senate back in 2018. He is a resident of Whitman. He's a graduate of Lehigh University and an Eagle Scout. So it's great to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
Ed, thank you very much, Janet.
Happy end of July.
Wet July.
Wet July, end of wet
Holy
July.
I can't believe the summer is half over, or more than that at this point. So let's start this conversation.
And the Sox are in the hunt. That's the most important thing.
You are absolutely right about that. So the conversation, there's sort of two elephants in the room here while we have this conversation, Charlie Baker and Donald Trump. Since you're running for governor, let's start with Baker. If Charlie Baker runs for a third term, why do you think you can beat him?
Well, first of all, I think we're open to seeing whether Charlie is going to run, whether Karen decides to run. I think it's getting close to deciding time. I hope he makes a decision. I think people in the Republican Party would like to know how he really feels about serving that potential third term. But if he does run, that's fine. I think it's important to have that debate within the Republican Party about where his values are and where he wants to go with the state. And I think my time serving in the legislature, running for a U.S. Senate in 2018, gave me a chance to go around the state, learn a lot about the different regions and what's important. He and I may differ on some things, like the TCI, for example, but let's have that debate. I think is important for this primary.
Give us some other issues that you think Republicans would side with you over Charlie Baker.
Right off the bat, I think the unemployment insurance that's immediately on the table right now, the federal money that's come in, $5.3 billion. I know the legislature's sort of taken that, but at the same time, Charlie Baker had some revenue that was coming in, unanticipated tax revenue, possibly $1.5 billion. Right now, they're putting all the burden on small businesses to pay back that unemployment trust fund. And I think that federal money was earmarked, supposed to be, to help those small businesses recover. I think it was also good for the governor if he had decided to put that money there. But he signaled to small businesses he'd rather spend it elsewhere. So in my opinion, I think right now, unemployment insurance and getting small businesses back on track is important. And look, we've got federal spending that's about to hit us in a big way, causing inflation. So I think we've got to, again, look to getting those companies back up and running with the workers they need. I think also Charlie's allowed the unemployment insurance to have that enhancement. I think we need to get rid of that so people are incentivized to get back to the workplace.
Governor Baker also has one of the highest approval rates of any governor in recent history, and he still holds it through, even if you compare governors in the country, too. So if you won the GOP primary, why do you think you could win a very blue and a very progressive state of Massachusetts?
Well, Ed, I think if you actually go back and look at the numbers in 2018, you may be surprised who was the third highest vote getter in that race. So Charlie Baker and Elizabeth Warren were the top two. I actually beat people like Maura Healey, the governor's nominee from the Democratic Party. So I think we have about 1 million voters. We think 2022 looks like, if it looks like 2018, about maybe 1.8 to 2 million voters. We think we're right there with the amount of voters that would support me. So not just in the primary, but also in the general election.
So just about every issue in next year's campaign, or I should say election, will have to do with the pandemic. What's your assessment of how Charlie Baker has handled the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean,
we've seen, for example, a spike in cases in Provincetown and Cape Cod recently. Can the administration be faulted for being more reactive than proactive?
Look, I think this goes way back to when President Trump was in office, tried to create, a travel ban so that we wouldn't have people coming from the infected area into our country. There was some pushback on that, even with not just Governor Baker, but also local legislators that were saying, this is, Asian hate. It wasn't. It was just trying to protect, I think, our citizens from coming from an infected area. But that being said, we've moved forward beyond that to the point where, there was obviously the lockdowns. It was a fairly uneven lockdown. I mean, first of all, big box retailers were allowed to stay open while small businesses were forced to close right away. Obviously, we know that schools basically shut down in 2020. I have two daughters, both were in high school at the time, and they're basically 2020 there was really no end of the year. It just kind of dissolved into nothing. And then 2021 was even more challenges with the cohorts. So the thing is, I think that the state wasn't prepared for a pandemic like this, clearly, and education was one of those big areas.
Did Charlie do a good job, though? Did Charlie Baker do a good job?
Well, I mean, again, you have to look at some of the decisions that were made from the Secretary of Health and Human Services. There was directives telling those nursing homes, not just the Holyoke Soldiers Home, to put people back into the mix that had COVID, back into that uninfected population. Those were bad decisions that were made.
I want to go back to something you just said a few minutes ago. Are you saying there was no Asian hate as a result of this pandemic? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that they were trying to lump in Donald Trump's decision to try to protect the citizens of the United States from having flights coming from that area.
But do you believe there was Asian hate that resulted
certainly
as a result of this?
Yes, absolutely. Look, I also understand that our involvement in the Gulf War caused a lot of tension with the Muslim community. Look, I think we're a very inclusive country, and especially Massachusetts is a very inclusive state. The only thing is that there was always an attempt to try to paint the president at the time as someone who was focused on, I think.
And you don't think that was fair?
I don't think it was fair.
You mentioned the chaos of education and whatever. Just out of curiosity, and real quick, the city of Boston, the mayor of Boston, the acting mayor of Boston is saying right now masks will be required in Boston schools. The governor says it's up to individual communities. What is your belief? What's your belief on that?
Yeah, I think different communities have reacted differently as far as how they're protecting their citizens. So if Boston has a higher infection rate, maybe that's the best path to go. But as a whole, as a statewide policy, I think this town should make those decisions, but overall, I think the state is getting to the point where we have a lot of people who have been vaccinated.
Yeah.
If those vaccinations are doing their job, we should be fine.
So, all right. So let's turn to Donald Trump. As Janet mentioned at the beginning of the show, there are two elephants in the room, and the other one is Donald Trump. You have supported him. You were co-chair of his Massachusetts campaign in 2016. So do you think that Donald Trump holds any responsibility for the January 6th invasion of the U.S. Capitol? And should he be held accountable if so?
Well, first of all, I'm all for that investigation into January 6th because I think things happen that everybody wants to know about. I think it was an awful situation, just like I think all the riots in 2020 in cities across the country were awful. But I don't think that he was necessarily responsible for it. I think that there's been plenty of political leaders that say, come to Washington and express, your political views during marches. I think it just was something that unfortunately got out of hand by bad actors that came that day.
And he's not responsible by telling them to go to the Capitol and tell them to let people know exactly how they feel about the election?
I served in the legislature. We had a lot of advocacy groups tell people to come into the State House, come to our offices and tell us exactly how they feel about bills. I don't see how that's his responsibility.
And not to make this about Donald Trump, because we're talking about you and the state of Massachusetts and governor. If Trump did run again, would you support him?
Of course, I supported him in 2016. I think the policies are fantastic. He hasn't announced that he's running, so of course that's a decision to be made.
Right.
If he does run,
right.
I would. If the policies are same, I think I would support him. I think the real question, though, especially in this election cycle, is going to be why didn't Charlie Baker support the president and his policies? I understand that some people don't like the way he talks or tweets, but at the same time, Charlie Baker never had a relationship with a Republican president, and I think that's going to be a big factor within the Republican primary.
Do you think this election was stolen from him, from Donald Trump?
I don't know. I don't think you or anybody knows at this point. I think that states are looking at their election procedures to see if they, if policy is tight to make sure that you've got valid election laws. I think here in Massachusetts, I know that Jim Lyons, the chairman of the Republican Party, is getting ready to put forward a voter ID ballot question. So I think we'll have that discussion even more robustly over the next year.
So you don't want to weigh in on that right now?
Oh no, I don't. I can't tell you whether he did or did not. It did not get stolen. I tend to doubt there was an overall steal effort, but I think some states, maybe had different election laws.
Even if all the evidence seems to indicate it's completely, it was not. At least the overwhelming evidence now.
Yeah, well, look, I also don't think that the 2016 election was stolen by Russian agents trying to get Donald Trump in. So, I think both parties seem to be very reluctant to accept the results sometimes of our recent elections.